Click record. Okay. So what we'll do is read through paragraph by paragraph, kind of like what we've done in the past. And what we'll do is first you're going to break it down sentence by sentence for me of like, oh, I think it's an idea, a definition, etc. And then we'll kind of just meet together and be like, okay, what exactly are we missing? What did we get? That kind of stuff. Like kind of like the YouTube video. So whenever you're ready to start, you can just read those first few lines, like that first paragraph.
Okay. In the first place, to make the poem or the novel the central concern of literary criticism has appeared to mean cutting it loose from its author and from the author's hopes, fears, interests, conflicts, etc. Okay, that was a long, really long sentence. A criticism so limited may seem bloodless and hollow.
Yep. So what do you think of the first sentence? You can kind of chunk it out and try to figure out what they're saying.
Okay, so in the first place, I think I would stop there. Just like for some reason, I don't know. I just would turn that into a sentence, and then to make the poem or novel. So they're focusing on a poem, novel, the central concern. So again, it's like telling us that it's the maybe the point that they're going to focus on from a literary criticism perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would also chunk it there. Has appeared to mean cutting it loose from its author and from the author's particular hopes. Okay, wait,
You
this
could
one's
probably
challenging.
chunk it in half. So
Okay.
we're looking at novels and poems. Those are the main focus of like literary criticism. And when you do that, you have to cut it loose from the author. So we're like taking the
Mhm.
author out of the picture. And we're also taking out the author's hopes, their fears, their interests, their conflicts. So we're separating the poem and the novel from like the author itself. Um, and that's what that big long sentence says. I feel like I would get points off for this in an English class, but this is the answer.
Mhm.
So, um, and then what does the last sentence say? It's kind of
Uh,
giving us what the author thinks about this type of criticism.
bloodless and hollow. Oops.
Yeah, so like pretty negative. So
Yes.
when you do literary criticism, you're separating the work from the author, and doing that makes it very bloodless and hollow criticism. So bad. Like, and it's just basically saying this is very bad. Um, okay, and hold on, I'm zooming
How would
in.
we how would we rate a little summary for this one? So I think I have just written down now like literary crit, and then I put like slash uh sep separate author. So it's like they're taking the
Mhm.
author out, and then I just gonna put parentheses with a minus inside, so I know like the focus is just negative.
Yeah, you could even say, I'll say literary crit, like you said, separate author equals bad.
Oh, okay. Let's see.
So it's a bad thing based on what the author is saying. Or you could say like limited, or there's a lot of ways you could say it, but basically the tone is, oh, this is not a good thing to do. Um,
Okay.
yeah, that was pretty good. Okay, let's try the next paragraph. And as you're reading, you can also chunk it.
Okay. So in the second place, okay, I think I would chunk it there. So this is like giving me the idea that they're adding something else to the first perspective of literary criticism. To emphasize the work seems to involve severing it from those who actually read it. I'll chunk it there. So it's now saying that we're also cutting out people who read it. So like I would assume maybe it's the audience.
Hmm.
And this severance may seem drastic and therefore disastrous. It's the end of this sentence. So again, very negative tone. After all, literature is written to be read. So I think it's just like continues on with the idea that um, it's bad to also take out the reader perspective, but yet literature is written to be read.
Yeah. So like if we just say I'll just say literature, separate reader equals bad. So having that kind of parallelism between the summaries is really helpful because now we
Yes.
know that one adds on to two. Um, and you can highlight something here too. You could say like severing it from those who read it, um, drastic or disastrous. So you can highlight those too, just in case you're like, okay, I want to keep track of who they're talking about and like the general tone. Let me clean this stuff up a little bit. Oh yeah,
Okay.
and I just uploaded a video on chunking too. So if you ever want practice on it, there's a Khan Academy video with like one of the like more dense passages. So that's always there
Oh,
as well.
okay. I will go look for that one too.
Yeah. Okay. So after all literature is written to be read, okay. So then we have paragraph 3. So kind of do the same thing. Read out loud. You can kind of work through it, um, and chunk out the sentences. So chunking it out will help you figure out, hey, what are they talking about and what direction are we going?
Okay. The formalist critic. So now I think we're talking about like a more specific critic.
Mm-hmm.
Knows as well as anyone that poems and plays and novels are written as expressions. I think I'll probably chunk it there. Sorry, I'm just gonna highlight this thing. I should highlight as I read. Expressions of particular personalities are written from all sorts of motives. I think I would also chunk it there. So like now it's talking about like the personalities, but from written from like whatever is motivating them to, I guess, write these novels or poems.
Mm-hmm.
From money, so like I guess now it's saying like one of the motives could be money, from a desire to express oneself, so expressing oneself, sake of cause, and etc. So like these are different examples. Moreover, so in addition, the formalist critic knows as well as anyone that literary works are merely potential until they are read.
Probably
Maybe
stop
I'll
right
stop
there.
there. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, literary works, I guess, don't achieve their full potential until someone actually reads them. So
Mm.
merely potential means they're nothing more than like something that could possibly happen. Once you read it, maybe there's something that happens.
Oh, I see.
And the
Until.
stuff that comes after it, there's a hyphen there, so it's probably going to explain what they mean.
Oh, gotcha. That is that they are recreated in the minds of actual readers. Oh, okay, so now this is like the extension to what you just said is that it's basically talking about the imagination, right? As the reader,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, interprets whatever they're reading. And then I would definitely chunk it at that comma. So, who vary enormously in their capabilities, their interests, their prejudice, their ideas. So, I think this is it's just saying that it does vary by the reader themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But the formalist critic is concerned primarily with the work itself. So now it's reconnecting us back to the idea of what they primarily focus on, which is the work itself. Um,
I would highlight primarily too,
oh,
just in case if anything asks about that, then you know, okay, this is what their main focus is. Because we spent all this time here that, like, okay, one of the things Foremost Critic knows is that plays and novels, the people who write them have different motivations, right? Like different motives. And they
mhm.
also know that a literary work is nothing until people actually read it. So then this clarifies what their main focus is. You could even highlight the whole sentence if you're just like, oh, just in case. It's not required, but it seems like it's a good important piece of information that hey, this is what they're gonna focus on the most. Um, okay, and you can keep reading.
Okay. And then I guess well, a quick question is, I, like highlighting this would also be good. I would assume if we get a question that we're stuck with 50-50, and like the wording seems like they're both good, but this would maybe help choose the better answer.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
it's telling you like, okay, we have all these factors above, but this is the cake. This is what takes it home. like the main thing
Ah,
that they're focusing on. So stuff like primarily it's just a good signal because it's like, oh, I should pay attention to this because that's
okay,
what their main focus is.
okay,
So you can
gotcha.
almost think of information like we haven't talked, I feel like I should have mentioned this before, but you can think of it as like a hierarchy. So you have like your big topics, you have supporting details, and if the author ever confirms something or tells you one thing is more important than the other, you can kind of hierarchy it or like put in a tier. So like this
Mm,
stuff would be like top tier kind of stuff. They focus on the work. The supporting details of that is like, hey, they look at the motives. They want to make sure people actually read it. So the main thing is oh, they're
mhm,
looking at the work. So you can kind of like try to prioritize that stuff too, and because it
gotcha.
helps in your mind just to organize it.
And it's actually pretty thoroughly explained. Well, backed up with evidence, I think, now that I'm seeing it
Yeah,
all.
a hierarchy is just another way of doing ice. It's just a different
Gotcha.
way of doing it. That's all. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Continuing. Speculation on the mental processes of the author takes the critic away from the work into biography and psychology. So I think that's just a pretty straightforward sentence. So they're saying that it's the the potential probably reason behind this is the mental process behind the author. Oh wait, of the author takes the critic away from the work into biography and psychology. Oh,
So
maybe yeah,
looking
that's.
at so looking at what the author thinks means that hey, we're no longer focused on only the work. Now we're focused on stuff about the author, their
Mm,
life, their experiences, their thought process. So this is like going against kind of what they say here, where it's like, oh, if we're focusing only on the work, then it actually adds up why maybe they don't want you to look at the author, right? Because we know from the first paragraph that if you take the author away from a work and the
mhm,
criticism, it becomes hollow.
bad.
But here now they're saying here's a problem with that. And like, kind of formalist critics don't look at this stuff or, well, I guess, yeah, it takes it away from the work. So that's why they don't look at the author to focus just on the work. Um, okay, any questions on that
Nope.
one? All right, let's try that last sentence.
Okay. Such studies describe the process of composition. So I think I would stop there. So it's like focusing on composition and not the structure of the thing composed. So I assume the thing composed is like any poem, plays, or novels.
Yeah, like the work. So they're looking at how such studies, so studies that look at, I'm assuming the author, describe how the work is made, not the work itself. So it takes away from the work.
Gotcha.
We're all looping back to that argument. Oh, okay. It's the work
I
itself.
see. So it's like it circles
So
back up.
yeah, basically like, oh, whenever we say like how does this relate to something I read previously,
Mhm.
if it refers to such studies, it's like which studies? These kind of studies right here, the ones that look at the author's like mental thought process and whatnot. And why are they talking about it? Because those kind of studies take away from the work itself. So yeah, we're kind of like just circling back. Always think of it as like a little like I don't know, like washing machine or something. It's like maybe the circle
Mhm.
of life is better, but it's always circling. It's always circling back. I know it's like I couldn't think of an analogy, but it's always circling back on top of each other. Okay, so what would we write down as a summary for this?
Okay, so honestly, this is like where I think one of my biggest struggles is when I have a paragraph that's just like loaded with so much things, and also I think my highlights might overwhelm me too because I think I highlight more than I should. Is I struggle with synthesizing it, and I think for what I remember, you taught me is always focus at the first sentence and the last sentence of the paragraph. But I feel like I still struggle with that. So I know that I, as far as I wrote down for my summary, I just wrote formalist critic, and then I have like in parentheses like work itself. So that's telling me that's what they basically focus on, and then I stop there.
Yeah, that's really good. Like
Oh,
that's really
okay.
the easiest way to do it because the beginning part right here is like all those different like fluff details of like, oh, well not fluff. I don't know if it's fluff yet, but it's talking about how formalist critics like look at poems and plays in a certain way and their motivations. And where I probably would have started with the summary is just like, well, they're telling us that they're primarily focused with this. And all that stuff kind of backs up what they mentioned earlier. So
Uh,
it makes sense that, like, oh, this is probably the best thing that we can work with because that's the main primary focus. And then you can use that summary to say, okay, if they need me to figure out any other details about a formalist critic that I don't remember, I know at least to look at paragraph 3 because that's the first place I'm being directed to like look at it based on the summaries. So yeah, that was pretty good. I think if you're trying to figure out, okay, which ones should I focus on in the summary more or less, it's like which ones are your big, that's how you have to prioritize like that tier, right?
uh,
So
mhm.
this information right here about the work itself fed into stuff from the beginning of the paragraph and it also explains stuff from the rest of the paragraph. So that's the kind of thing you want to write down. It's like your anchor for the rest of the paragraph.
Okay.
Yeah. I feel like there was a really big setup and then a late kind of like crescendo, like a big like,
Mhm.
oh, this is what's really important. So yeah, how did you end up picking paragraph or for the the third summary? How did you end up picking that summary? Because you said, hey, I
Um,
have a hard time doing it. And I'm like, you wrote a great summary.
I think it's because I feel like so I think I got the main purpose of what the paragraph is, like the formalist critic, like because I know that's like they're introducing a more specific example, and then how it said like what the formalist critic is. It's basically focused on explaining that they just focus on the work itself. But I feel like I'm missing something else to add to it, and I think that's maybe the internal mental struggle that I go through with tough paragraphs like this.
What would you feel like you wanted to add in? Like, what are some possibilities? Because we can talk about, oh, like, would it be
Um,
reasonable to keep it or would it be better to leave that out?
I think I think in this case maybe is it important to maybe include like more details about like how it's um like the motives behind it as the or like the way that readers are interpreting the process of when they're reading through it. I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking.
I don't know if I would write this stuff down because that just feeds into, remember, like from here to here, it's just an explanation for why a foremost critic thinks that literary works are only potential, right? That they
Okay.
have to be recreated in the minds of the readers. So writing down the reader's motivations doesn't tell you too much because it doesn't relate back to kind of like the foremost critic. What you can write down if you want to keep in mind like what they talked about with the author is, hold on, let me zoom out a little bit. Okay, this is good. You could write down work itself, not author.
Oh, okay, okay.
Just to clarify, like, okay, all this stuff about authors' motivations, readers' motivations, it all boils down to they look at purely the work, not the author, their biography, their psychology, or how they made the work. Um,
Gotcha.
yeah, I think I think there's sometimes like a fear of like, oh, I should write down everything because I might tend to
Mhm.
forget it or anything like that. But it's easier to keep this like simpler one. Like think of it as like you're building a skeleton, and all your meat that like you don't really need but is there is in the passage. So just focus
Okay.
on that skeleton like that core. Okay. Any questions on the third paragraph?
No.
Okay, let's try out the fourth one.
Okay. On the other hand, okay, so this is like I'll probably chunk it there, and this now it's like on another reason, expiration of the various readings which the work has received also takes the critic away. Oh wait, I think I read too fast on that one. Expiration of the various readings which the work has received. I think maybe I could chunk it there. So now it's like the exploration of a mix of readings. Um, also takes a critic away from the work into psychology and the history of taste. Okay, so it ends there. So now it's I think I'm picking up that it's now taking the critic away from the work itself, but from the thought process and maybe the context of what the topic is, maybe. I don't know if that was a stretch.
Yeah, because it's saying on the other hand, so it's gonna be kind of like a little different, or maybe even opposed to what we read before, right? So what we read in the third paragraph is that the foremost critic only looks at the work itself, right? They only look at literary works, they don't look at anything else. So what they're saying here is like, oh, well, on the other hand, so in contrast, if we keep looking at only the work, it can also take the critic away from the work into psychology. It can take it into like context, or maybe what people like, like their taste in literature. So they're
Mm-hmm.
kind of like contrasting paragraph 3, and saying, yes, we can continue to look at various readings in literature, but there's still even a downside to this that still takes us away from the work.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, continuing. So, but I feel like I forgot to highlight transition words, but now I'm just remembered. So, but such work, maybe chunk there. Valuable and necessary as it may be, I'll chunk it there. So it's like valuable and it's saying that it is necessary. Oops. Oops. Okay. Is to be distinguished from a criticism of the work itself. Um, so again, I think it's just it's still talking about the first part.
Yeah. It's basically saying like these kinds of works, like these readings and everything, even though they're good. So I'll just put like, oh, that was so small. I don't think it's possible to read it. Okay, so they're saying even though it's like good, is not the same as like criticizing the work.
Mm-hmm.
So they're separating it somehow, and we still don't know like what that separation is, but they're probably gonna explain it as we keep reading. Of like, okay, so what is the difference? Or like, can you give me some more details? So yeah, just kind of relates to the previous sentence. Um, any questions so far?
No.
Cool. You're doing really good. Let's keep going.
Okay. The formalist critic makes two assumptions. Okay, I think I will stop there. So now we're back to the formalist critic. One, that the relevant part of the author's intention. Okay, maybe I'll stop there. So so now it's author's intention is what the author actually put into the work. So a chunk there. So it's again, I'm thinking now it's bringing back to the idea of the work. That is, the critic assumes that the author's intention. Maybe I'll stop there. As realized, is the intention that counts. Okay, this is interesting.
So long story short, what are they saying with number 1?
Um, it's basically the author's intention is what counts for his work.
Yeah, that's they said that in like way too many words, but yeah.
Yeah.
And also what you could do is highlight like you can either highlight assumptions or you can highlight the numbers just to help keep track of it in case they're like, oh, what is it? And then it's like, oh, I don't remember something. You have like the numbers highlighted. So yeah, they're just saying they spent 2 whole paragraphs debating on if you should use the author's intention and if you should look at the author's work or if you should only look at like the literature. And then they finally decided, okay, we can look at the author's intention and that's what's important in the text. Okay, so how about number 2?
Okay. The formalist critic assumes, again, we're assuming an ideal reader, so chunk, so we're focusing on the ideal reader. So now we're back to the reader perspective. That is, instead of focusing on the varying spectrum of possible readings, I would chunk there. The critic
I would
attempts.
highlight. Ooh, I would highlight instead. I would highlight
Oh,
instead.
I missed that one.
Because those kind of words tell you like, okay, they're not focusing on that spectrum that we saw in the last paragraph, Remember they said readers can interpret it in different ways, so they're not focusing on that here.
Oh, I did not catch that. That is instead of focusing on the varying spectrum of possible readings. So that what they mean by the varying spectrum is the things that was said before, right, in the previous paragraphs. Okay. The critic attempts to find a central point of reference. I'll just probably stop at reference, from which to focus on the structure of the poem or novel. Okay, so now it's like more structure.
So how are they focusing on the structure? They use some kind of reference. So they're using some kind of standard to try to look at the novel and everything. So how would we summarize number 2?
Okay, so maybe I think I'll probably write it as like a 2-part. So I'll probably put author dash intention and then slash reader. Oops. So I know it's like central point of reference was important, but then also on structure. So maybe I'll just put structure, but know that my highlight is anchor.
I would put reference maybe.
Okay.
Because we're focusing
Structure
on the
reference.
ideal reader. So you could say like ideal reader dash or equals like ref for reference.
Okay.
So you could either write 2 assumptions or you could use those numbers to kind of refer to like the what's it
I
called?
like that.
The 2
Yes.
assumptions in the so like visually, if that helps a little bit better, then just go for it. Let me
Actually, yeah, it looks more nice to read it the way that you wrote it versus me. It looks like a long sentence.
Yeah, like don't be afraid to use the space because they give you more sheets if you run out. So they're not just gonna be like, oh, that's all you get. Like the little packet has, I think, like a few pages, so you can use that as much as you want.
Okay, and you're not. It doesn't allow you to erase either, right? Apparently.
No, that's what shocked me. I went on the test and I wrote it, and I was like, oh, I can't erase it. So it's kind of like permanent. It's like writing on pen and paper, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions on paragraph 4?
Nope. I think the summaries are helping me stay synthesized.
Nice. Okay, let's
Okay.
try paragraph 5.
Okay, so there is no ideal reader. Okay, oh boy. I feel like we're jumping back and forth. So I think I would chunk that. And I feel like, of course, I probably would just like, it's just like a little scratch. Maybe just scratch it out. In my head,
I
scratch
think
out.
the of course is just them being like, oh, we can never define an
Yeah.
an ideal reader, even though they do it for us. But they're like, oh, there's no ideal reader, you know that. Okay, but so now they're gonna say something opposite.
I know. For the purpose of focusing on the poem, rather, yeah, poem. I think I would stop there too. So the purpose of focusing on the poem. Okay, so we have purpose. Oh, I don't know. Maybe I'll just continue. Rather than on the critic's own reactions, I think I would chunk it there. It is a defensible strategy.
So what exactly are they saying is a defensible strategy?
The critic's reaction.
Not the critic's reaction. Circle back to what they referred to in that first sentence.
Oh, no ideal reader.
So remember how we were kind of like, oh, they're telling us that there's no ideal reader, but in the previous paragraph they defined it. So, but means it's like opposite. So they're basically going to tell us why the ideal reader is good. Happy face. So they gave us that strategy of like, oh, looking at the ideal reader, this is how you should do it. And now they're telling us why you should do it, even though there's no like set definition. And the reason they're doing it is so you don't focus on the critic's own reactions, you focus on the poem itself. So it lets them look at the work.
Okay.
So that's when, if you see like, what is that called? It's not a pronoun. It's a definite article. See, Spanish coming in. I learned more grammar. I learned way more grammar through Spanish than I ever did in an English class. But this is your article, it, right? It's just referring to
Mhm.
something. We don't know what that is. That's a signal to you, like, oh, I should circle back to like something I read before. So it is a defensible strategy, meaning the author's like, it's okay to use this strategy. What are they talking about is from that previous paragraph talking about defining the ideal reader. And the reason
Oh,
you do it is rather than focusing on the critic, you focus on the poem. Yep. So words like rather is also good because it's going to tell you, okay, instead of focusing on this, we're actually focusing on the poem.
oh.
I wouldn't
That was a
even highlight critics. Oh, wait, what's up?
that's a hard one.
They wrote it backwards. It's like, yeah, like the way you could actually write it in an easier way is like, it's a it is a defensible strategy for the purpose of focusing on the poem rather than the critic's own reaction. So thinking about the ideal reader helps you focus on the poem instead of the critic's reaction. So words you can watch out for is like but, rather. If they
Mhm.
start referring to something like it, you want to always circle back and think, what are we talking about again? Like we're talking about the ideal reader, and that's what we talked about in the previous paragraph too. So I know when we started it, you're like, oh, they're going back and forth. And now you know why
Yeah,
they're going back and forth.
gotcha.
All right. Any questions
Interesting.
on this
Okay.
one?
No.
See how we took one sentence and like analyzed it? So, like, how
Yes.
do you do it when you're reading? Probably the easiest way to do it when you're reading is always in the back of your mind. Actually, you don't need to keep it in your head, you have it on your summaries. So, keep your
Mhm.
summaries next to you. And if they say, okay, there's no ideal reader, you're just like, what the heck? They just defined it for me. Then they say but. So that's a signal, okay, they're going to tell me the opposite. So maybe they're going to tell me why it's a good thing. And then they say, oh, you can focus on the poem instead of the critic's reactions. It's a defensible strategy. So you're like, okay, it refers to what I wrote about in paragraph 4 about the ideal reader. So keep those summaries there and keep an eye out for some of those words that will tell you, okay, is what's going to come next the opposite, or are we going to talk about like something different? Um, if there's anything vague, then that's a signal, okay, I have to like go back and circle back, think about something I read previously. Um,
Okay.
okay, yeah, let's go through the next one.
Okay. Okay. Now I'm seeing a whole bunch of parentheses that come in this paragraph. The alternatives are desperate. So maybe stop there. So I think desperate, I feel like it's a kind of strong statement.
Mhm.
So either we say that one person's reading is as good as authors, I'll chunk there, and thus deny the possibility of any standard reading. I think I would stop there as well. Or, so I feel like this is another transition. Oh no, it's just like an add-in. Else we take the lowest common denominator of the various readings. I'll stop there as well. That have been made. That is, I hate these dashes. That have been made.
Anytime you see that, that's actually a good thing because then it's like if you didn't understand what they said before that point, they're gonna explain it. That's just
Okay.
them. They're gonna explain it. And look,
Okay.
this whole thing was like 3 lines.
I
Read what
know.
comes next. Read what comes next. It's just gonna tell you everything in simpler terms.
Okay, because I honestly I am mentally struggling. I'm like, okay, I don't know what they're trying to get at right now. Okay, so the dashes reference that they potentially will explain. That is, we frankly move from literary criticism into social psychology.
They just explained it, so you don't
Oh
even
my
have to
god.
highlight it. You don't actually. What you can start doing is like highlighting after you read the sentence and understand what they said. Um,
I'll
because
do
that
that.
will just prevent you from over highlighting. It'll prevent you from possibly like highlighting stuff you don't need. And then, yeah, the dash is actually a good thing. I love dashes because that means
Okay.
I'm not gonna lie. Like sometimes when I'm reading passages, I will just, if I see a dash, I just skip the other stuff that comes before it and just read what comes after it because it's so much simpler. You can, oops, ooh,
Oh,
I'm low on battery. You can highlight that whole thing. We move
okay.
from literary criticism into social psychology. It's so much easier just to read, just read the dash.
I
See
know. I
now
was
it's
like,
like a, we went from
all of
hating
that
it
just
to
for this.
loving it. Yeah.
Oh
Okay.
no. Okay. To the.
So,
Pro-
oh, really
okay.
quick. So far we know that the ideal reader is a good strategy. It helps us, yeah, it helps us not do this because the alternatives are pretty desperate. Desperate is a good word to highlight. It's a good tone word. Um, so yeah, alternatives are
Okay.
pretty desperate. It causes us to move from literary criticism into social psychology, which we know is a bad thing, right? Because they want to
Mhm.
focus on the work. Okay, you can continue.
Okay. To propose taking a consensus of the opinions of qualified readers, I think I would chunk it there, is simply to split the ideal reader into a group of ideal readers. Okay, so now
So is that good or bad?
I kind of view it as like it's like they're now separating them. So maybe it's not good.
Yeah, it's basically saying like this is all within that same parentheses. So this is
Mm-hmm.
one of those alternatives, right? So the alternative can either, let me clean this up.
Oh shoot, that was a big parenthesis
Yeah, it was
block.
very big. It's like the alternative can either push us into social psychology or it can just split the ideal reader, which doesn't really solve the problem, right? Um, it doesn't help
Mhm.
us like define it any further. They're quote unquote qualified, so it's like it's very arbitrary. It's like however we decide to define it. So what's basically happening here is they're telling us just another kind of like bad outcome that can happen. So all of this is basically to say, hey, it's okay to focus on the ideal reader. It's a good strategy because your alternatives are pretty bad. Um, bad alts. And they gave us like two reasons for that.
Oh, I see it now. Without actually numbering it this time.
Yeah, like they don't number it, but it's like they gave two sentences, so like two reasons that it's pretty bad.
Is this little quote thing something that you would highlight
I would probably highlight it just so I know it's like
in
it's like
case you get a
quote
question that's
unquote
like
more.
you reference
Yeah.
back to?
I don't know. I just see things like that where it's like nothing else was quoted. So I would probably highlight it just for the sake of keeping it there. And also because it kind of shows the tone. It's like, okay, quote unquote qualified, like we don't really know if they're actually qualified or not. Like it's just very arbitrary, that kind of stuff. Um, yeah, but I don't know if it would like really hurt to not highlight it. I'm not sure. Um,
Okay. Yeah. Honestly, I'm getting an impression from this that like I think when I read it and then that last statement about like how they're split into different groups and when they have this one opinions of qualified reader, I feel like they separated like the real smart people versus the ones that are like maybe average. I'm getting.
yeah,
I don't like all
like
restricting that, but
yeah, it's like they like select the best ones, and then
yeah.
all you're
Okay.
doing, what they're basically saying is like, listen, everyone reads differently. All you're doing is just splitting up what you think is the ideal reader into like more groups. You're just splitting everything up. You're not narrowing it down any further. But what
Okay.
I would say for this one is like, since it's very easy to get lost in all this stuff, just
Mhm.
as you read the sentence, like try to loop it back. Like, wait, what was this referring to? It's referring back to those alternatives because that's what will help you keep track of like, okay, this is kind of what they're talking about. Because just a lot, it's just dense. Like I
Yes.
think you do really well when it's shorter because it's like less to kind of loop back. So just practice for the longer ones. But you can even do when you look at it, if you see the parentheses, you can just highlight here and here and treat it like a paragraph. So you
Oh,
kind of have those, you just have those blocks. Because you
and
can
then put
highlight
them.
the spaces. Yeah. And you can just treat each chunk.
Oh, that's a good idea, actually. Okay, turning it into a little bit more bit-sized pieces of chunking.
Yeah,
Like
because
you're
the big paragraphs
chunking
gets intimidating. Oh wait, go ahead. Sorry.
totally. No, no, it's like you chunk. Not only you chunk the sentence, but you chunk the paragraph too.
Yes. I don't think people
I love
realize
it.
how much I do that like on a daily, even if I'm reading like a news article, I'll just be like, okay, it's kind of long. Let me just like pick some spots where I'm gonna
Mhm.
take a mental break and then I'll just keep reading.
It's like the unhidden strategies, but I don't know how to explain it.
I
But
think
yeah.
it's just that I'm not that great at realizing what I do until until I talk about it with someone and then I realize like, oh, that could be a strategy. I think anything can be a strategy. A strategy is just a habit that you do. You just call it a
Yes.
strategy because it's a beneficial habit.
I like that. Yes. That's totally what it is. That whole
Yeah,
relationship.
yeah.
Okay.
So okay, let's finish off this paragraph strong.
Okay. As consequences, so consequences, okay, so it's like focusing on negative stuff. The distinction just referred to, so maybe I'll stop there. So it's like again talking about the consequences of what was mentioned before. The formalist critic rejects two popular tests for literary value. So now I guess the formal critic is not agreeing to the idea, I guess, of what was just mentioned before.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know if I'll highlight anything in this one though. Maybe
I would
consequences.
I would highlight no that first part is just kind of like a lead in. It's basically saying, okay, because we're focusing on the ideal reader and all the alternatives are bad, um,
Mhm.
I would probably highlight rejects too popular tests for literary value. And
Oh,
if
I
you don't
see.
want to highlight the four, you can just put too popular tests literary value because the next sentences are going to explain that. So you can always highlight those, or if you're just like, okay, I need to find out where these popular tests are, you have that written down there.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, gotcha. Okay, so now the first proves the value of the work from the author's sincerity. So I think I would stop there, but I probably would highlight first just so I know it's like marking the first part and then put this in quotes. Or the intensity of the author's feelings as he or she composed it.
So now they're
So I
defining sincerity.
mhm.
Sincerity equals intensity of your feelings.
Okay. We discount also such tests as the intensity of the critic's reaction. Oh, okay. I was just about to ask you that. I was like, does this or represent also like the start of the second transition or second test that they're gonna talk
Oh,
about?
that's a good question.
That's where I was
Mm,
like,
I think the parentheses is being used to explain what sincerity means.
sincerity,
Because they
gotcha.
also put that in quotes, so now they're defining it
Mhm.
for us.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's tricky. That's that. I feel like they try to set you up on a trap with that one.
They did. They didn't just say second. I'm like, that's kind of dirty. So the second thing, the second criteria is like the intensity of the critic's reaction.
Um,
So formalist critics don't look at how quote unquote sincere the author is, and they don't look at how critics react to it. Um, so in terms of what we would want to get from this, if we're looking at the beginning sentence and then the last sentences, we're basically just like, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna here, here. This big chunk we're just gonna ignore because it's just
uh,
saying that the alternatives are bad. So all you're gonna focus on is the first one, which is the ideal reader is a good strategy. So you can say
mhm.
ideal reader equals good strategy, and then formula or like you can say FC for formalist critic rejects two tests for lit value, something like that. Yeah, let me try coming up with something. So five. Ideal reader is good strat. And then for the second one, I'm just gonna say
reject, to test,
Two tests.
lit
Okay.
value. Yeah. So we know that, okay, if they talk about test for literary value, that's where they're going to refer to that.
Okay.
You see, once we got rid of that entire parentheses,
Yes.
it's like, it's so much more digestible. It's just a line on the top and then a few lines at the bottom.
And less
But-
intimidating to read through.
Yeah. Parentheses are usually used to just like give you some more details about what you just read. So you can always think of a parentheses as like a little footnote that they stick into the main body of the text. Okay, let me clean this up so it's not as horrendous to look at. But any questions about how we broke this down?
No. That was beautiful.
Thanks. It's
And
just
look how much,
it's just
how much
like
less time it is.
yeah, I feel like I learned more about how I read when I try to explain to someone how I read something. So it's
Mhm.
kind of cool. I was like,
Okay.
oh, I didn't realize how much I like chunk things out. So I'm like, I don't think maybe the way I've read since I was a kid like really hasn't changed. I don't know. So I have no idea. But it is bad though. Now that I read for literature, sometimes I'm like analyzing it through cars. I'm like, nope, I can't do that. I am just enjoying this book because
Yeah.
I am enjoying it. So
It
sometimes I
scars
have
you
to
a
like
little bit.
switch that up. Oh yeah, it does. It definitely does. Okay, let's try out that last paragraph.
Okay. A literary work is a document. Maybe I'll stop there.
Okay.
Is a document. So a literary work is a document. I think that's pretty straightforward. So, and as a document, so now I'll explain it as a document, can be analyzed in terms of the forces that have produced it. Chunk. Or it may be manipulated as a force in its own right. Okay, so the end of that sentence. So it's telling me that the literary work, the document itself, is analyzed in the terms of whoever produced it. So that's like the part one. And then oh okay, and the or C. Okay. Or it may be manipulated as the force in its own right. Okay, so maybe I'll just highlight analyze just so I know it's like marking and manipulated.
Oh, you can
It's all-
also highlight or. Just so
Yeah.
you know that hey, there's two things that they're talking about here. It's all linked together.
Okay, so I hope they will explain what the manipulate part is. It mirrors the past. I think you just say that. It may influence the future. So it's like I remember from the previous paragraph you said about the it
Yeah.
part.
So what does it refer to?
What was mentioned before?
Yeah. So what's the subject of like the first sentence?
Oh, sorry, the document, the literary
Yeah.
work.
It is a literary work.
I should highlight that.
So that's the focus. See that it's just practicing like, hey, let me just circle back. When they said document, what do they mean by a document? They meant a literary work.
See, okay. So it's saying that it could mirror the past or it may influence the future. These facts, it would be futile to deny. So futile, I think that's like a negative word.
So futile means it's not worth doing something. So the author's saying these facts are not worth denying, which is just a really roundabout way to say it's true. That's all that they're saying. It's all that they're saying. So futile means not worth like doing. And so these factors, it would be futile. They wrote it like Yoda's writing.
Yeah.
But all it's saying is that you can't deny these facts. That's all they're saying.
So there's no sense of debating it.
Yeah, there's no debate.
And I know of a critic who does deny them. Okay, so now they're probably like
Oh no.
saying like,
I know of
oh,
no critic.
oh, sorry.
No.
Oh,
So
that
they're
would have
out
made me
for debate. Yeah, and there's no critic who would deny this. So everyone is kind of on the same page that
agreeing.
all this stuff, and this is all pretty positive. Literary work can influence the future. It's like this force, it mirrors the past. So they're showing the, I guess, like the impact of literary work. And nobody can deny it.
Gotcha. Ooh, I read that too quick, I think.
Careful, careful, those
I
little
know.
words, they catch us off guard.
But so now we have a transition word again. The reduction of work of a work of literature to its cause does not constitute literary criticism, nor does an estimate of its effects. Okay,
So
so
this is
causes.
all the stuff that came before it is positive, right?
Mhm.
Literature can analyze the past and it's got force and it's like all this cool stuff. But if they say but, that's just them being like, hey, wait, wait, wait. I'm gonna rock you to the core, I'm gonna knock your socks off. They're saying you can't reduce a work of literature to its causes. And doing that doesn't mean that it's literary criticism. And it also doesn't estimate the effects. So you don't really, just because you're reducing the work of literature to how it came about or like why it came about, it doesn't count as literary criticism. And then it doesn't
Mhm.
help you figure out like its impact.
Oh,
Anytime they start mentioning more than one idea in the text, just start numbering it. That's how I
okay.
read. I just start numbering it. This is too much to keep track of. So then it'll help you link back, okay, what they're talking about here.
Okay. Good
I'll maybe
literature.
highlight. Okay, I would. Sorry. I would highlight not. Just yeah, and maybe nor too, because that's a good transition word of like, not this nor that.
But on each of the different points, I see.
Mhm.
Okay. So now good literature is more more than effective rhetoric applied to its true ideas. Okay, so if we see a dash, they're gonna explain more, I hope. Even if we could agree upon a philosophical yardstick for measuring the truth of ideas, I think I'll chunk there. And even if we could find some way that transcended knows counting for determining the effectiveness of the rhetoric. Okay, so I think I'm gonna highlight good literature just so I know it's like marking what they're explaining is more than effective rhetoric applied to true ideas.
So here, in this case, the dash didn't explain as much. It
uh
kind of just expanded on it. Yeah. So
totally.
sometimes the dash will explain, sometimes the stuff before it will be easier to understand. So now you notice that like in the last paragraph, the stuff, or one of the previous paragraphs, the stuff before the dash was more complicated, and the thing
Mhm.
that came after it was nicer. So in this case, they flipped it almost. The stuff before it was nicer, and the thing that came after it was much longer.
Like more fluff.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's saying good literature is more than effective rhetoric. So they're saying good literature just isn't fluff plus true ideas. Um, and they gave us some conditions like even if this was the case, or even if this was the case, good literature is still more than effective rhetoric.
Maybe it's just that's just the important point of the whole long sentence, run on sentence.
Yeah, honestly, if you were not sure about this ending, I would just ignore it because for now it's okay just to know, okay, it's gonna be effective rhetoric. It's more than just effective rhetoric to true ideas. Like there has to be some depth to it, all that kind of stuff. Um, yeah, I guess what
Ooh.
would you write for a summary?
Yeah, this is where it's tricky because I feel like there's just it's kind of like all over the place, but definitely okay, literature work because I feel like that's my mark of the paragraph. And that's what the focus of this paragraph was. Um I feel like I would write also analyze and then slash manipulated just because I feel like that was like the next points that was mentioned. And then no critic could deny him. Like I'm
But actually, I would probably just write lit work or literary work is like, just say lots of effects. Because that
lots of
way, lots.
That's what I
of
figured.
effects. Hey Siri. Okay. Oh shoot! Now my Siri is on. Oops. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
literary
want
work has lots of effects, which is everything they talk about from here to kind of like there. And then reducing the work doesn't criticize it, nor does it constitute it. Good literature. I'd probably just write define good lit. Because it's just a little too much to write down, and I don't want to focus on all that kind of stuff. It's just a little bit too much.
especially I feel like the point of the last paragraph was just very like convoluted, like
Yeah, it feels like they're tying in multiple loose ends,
mhm.
and yeah,
But a very
it
lazy
just feels
way of
like
like
yeah, it just feels like they're listing a bunch of things that they forgot to write earlier. That's the best
yeah.
way to think of it. It's just like, okay, a number of facts that they're sharing.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm not a
It's just
fan,
like
but
I read all these good things and like you guys set me up and you just ended it like this. I'm like, I'm so disappointed.
yeah, I am. I'm like, this is futile. This is not, it's not worth my time. So you're trying to use vocabulary words. That's what I do. My parents speak Telugu, which is like a South Indian language, and I understand it really well, but I really suck at like speaking it. I just sound so bad, so I embarrass myself. Um, and anytime like they just randomly use words that they assume I know, nowadays I've just been asking them, and then I
Uh-huh.
just throw it in like everyday sentences, but purposefully like out of context. So it's great. Because my dad used this word for like a large body of water. So we were passing by a lake, and I was like, "Yo, that's a samudram right there." My mom was like, "That's not how you use the word." I'm like, "But I've never forgotten the word now." So
Yeah,
just start using futile in like different contexts. Like it's so much
so
fun.
funny. Yes.
Okay. So
Okay.
any questions about the passage?
No, but I'm ready to kickstart these questions with the strategy approaches again.
Okay, so I'm gonna clear off the summaries just so you have like a nice clean slate to work off of. So for the questions, what you could probably do first is like identify the scope of a question. So is it main idea or is it something more specific? And if we do the first one, it says, according to the passage, formalist criticism focuses primarily on which of the following aspects of a literary work. So its effect on readers, the motivations, the structure, and the truth to its ideas. So this is almost like main idea because they're telling us what does a formalist critic primarily like to look at, which we even highlighted in the text. And I think we wrote it down too. So now that you know what they're talking about, so maybe, you know what, this might actually be more specific. We could even argue, hey, this is more specific because they told us what they primarily focus on, and we know that from the text. And then you can look back at your summary. So once you know the scope, you can look back at your summaries to kind of like figure out where they talked about it, brush up your memory, and then you want to cross off some answers that you're like, oh, it's definitely not this, and get it down to 50-50.
Okay.
And then, yeah, once you get it down to 50-50, you can kind of compare the answers. Like, does it match up to the question? Does it match up with what I know in the passage? That kind of stuff. So the best way to know when to go back in the passage is if you've exhausted figuring it out with your summaries or anything else and you're not sure what to do.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, so I definitely just looking at the answer choices, I know it's the formal critic focused on the work itself and not the author. So I know it has nothing to do with the author's motivations. And then the truth of its ideas, I don't think was really a focus of the work of a formalist critic. So I think I could easily eliminate that. I feel like it did talk about the structure a lot. And then even when I look at my map, it was the paragraph 3 and paragraph 4 that was contrasted between each other, the formalist critic, but then the ideal reader and the structure reference. So
So for
when
looking
I
at the
think,
work itself, yeah, go ahead.
so I guess when I think of the work itself, I would think that it would be focused on the structure, but then I know like here on the bottom of it says not the structure. So
Oh, no. When it's saying that stuff, such studies is referring to studies that look at the mental process of the author, which we know
gotcha.
is the opposite of looking at the work itself.
Yeah, so it would be structure.
Oh, go ahead and turn on review answers on the top because we can
Um,
just go over them as you do it.
oh, nice.
Yeah.
Oops.
And then
How do
I
I do?
think if you click confirm, it'll show it.
Oh,
Yeah,
yay,
nice.
okay. Whew.
So what I noticed when you were starting to look at the reader, first was like doubt. You're like, I don't know if
Hmm.
this is right. And second is the danger sometimes of highlighting is if you do look at this stuff, you know you need to think about the context. Like what was this
Yeah.
talking about? Such studies. Oh, what are those studies? Looking at the mental process of an author. Oh, is it the same thing as looking at the work itself? No, it's the opposite. So I don't have to worry about the reader. So go away from diving too much into the text because your summaries do most of the work for you.
Okay. Because I think like with time crunch, you would fall for the trap of just like referring to the highlight and then be like, oh wait, I highlighted that. That's got to be not the answer.
Yeah, and like remember that the summaries help you consolidate what's like the most important thing. Um, and we know for this paragraph, like there's so much information that they threw at us, but like we boiled it down to this sentence was the most important.
Yeah.
So that's just what you want to focus on.
Okay. Yay.
Doesn't it feel good? You're like, yeah.
Does,
Okay.
yes.
So implicit in the passage is the assumption that, so we have to think about the scope. Think of a scope as like a camera lens. Do I zoom in and look at something very specific, or do I zoom out and look at the main idea, right? The main idea versus specific. So does the question stem tell you to look at anything specific?
No, it just says passage overall. So I would think it's
Yeah.
main idea.
So which of these kind of like implicit things match up with the main idea the most?
Okay, some critical evaluations of literature are more valuable than others. No, I think it wasn't really focusing on like who was better than the other.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I would scratch that out. Criticism that dismisses the author's motivations is ineffective. Um, okay. Oh my god, I hate these.
Just keep it, and you
Okay.
can take a peek at your summaries if you need to. But just keep
Okay.
it for now. Just keep it for now.
The ideal reader is one who has attempted to create a work of art. No. I feel like that's
Yeah,
like
they didn't talk about it.
it's so weird. Like it felt like it was more detailed. That passage could have maybe emphasized more. But anyways, good literature is nothing more than effective rhetoric applied to true ideas. Okay, so that I know that was the last thing that I read in the ending paragraph. Um, so I
So now's a
potentially
good time to double check the ending paragraph just to make sure you got the context right.
so good literature is nothing more than effective rhetoric applied to true ideas, which it definitely blatantly says.
So does it say the same thing or does it say the opposite thing?
Oh, opposite, nothing.
Get rid of it. Get rid of it. So it's the opposite, right? So that's where when you're down to like two of them and you need to double check, okay, like what's going on, all that stuff. That's where we can't look at good literature and effective and say, oh, D has to be the right answer. Because D says good literature is nothing more than effective rhetoric, right? Which is the opposite of what they say in the passage. So
Oh god,
when
that
you're
one
going
little.
back to look for that evidence, it's really tempting to be like, oh, good literature, effective, I'll pick it. but look at the context. What's like the bigger picture? In that sentence, they're saying it's more than something an effective rhetoric being applied to true ideas. So when you said, "Oh, I read this in the passage," I was like, "No, we read something similar." So that's where they're trying to get you. Is they're banking on you just to read that part and jump to the answer.
I'm an easy victim for them.
But like you start to figure out the trends, right? If you
Yeah.
figure out the patterns and what's going on, then it's way easier to get rid of stuff. So D
Okay.
we can probably cross out. Um, criticism that dismisses the author's motivation. So criticism that doesn't look at the author's motivation is ineffective. Do they talk about that in the summaries? Like, because I think they mentioned it.
Yeah. It was rejected in, I think, in paragraph 5. So it's just 5 here. Well, they after all this long explanation, it just meant that the literary criticism into social psychology. So I guess it focuses on the author's motivation.
Yeah, and here for that one, the two assumptions, right? It says that a relevant part of the work is the author's intention. So this answer choice B is saying if we don't focus on the author's motivation, the criticism is ineffective, which matches up with what they're saying. It's just kind of written backwards. So that's probably why when you read it, you're like, I don't know which one it is.
Yeah.
It's just written in a backwards way. But what you can do is reword it in your head. The way I reworded it, I was like, oh, okay. If a criticism doesn't look at the author's motivations, equal sign, ineffective. Doesn't match up with what they say. Yeah, effective
Yeah.
criticism looks at the author's motivation or intention, I think. And then some critical evaluations of literature are more valuable than others. Is there anything?
It's the more valuable than others was felt funky to me.
It looks kind of weird. I'm like, they never said one was better than the other. And
Other
I
than
think literary. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I said other than the just that one of the readers being separated into 2 groups, but it didn't really use that as a main point.
Yeah, it talks about literary value here, so hopefully they don't refer to that for A, but let's check it. We can't be afraid to be wrong.
Oh.
Okay. Okay. So this is motivations. Because when I was doing B, I'm like, okay, this is intention versus motivation. So I have a feeling that's what they did here.
Oh, okay. I see it now in the
That's why I was
explanation.
backtracking to A, because I was like, wait a minute. But they also don't talk about what's more valuable than others. So yeah, so for B, let's double check what they say about A. Let's check it. So the assumption that critical evaluations focused on structural aspects of the work are more valuable than those that are focused on the author or the reader is evident. The reduction of a work does not constitute it. Oh,
Interesting.
they use something different. So in B,
Oh, I should scroll. Not suspected the mental statement nor that's a hard one.
it is kind of hard. I don't want to say it as a tutor because I'm like, it's my job to figure it out, but that is kind of hard. Can you scroll back up to the answers? Now I want to see. So some evaluations are more valuable than others. Oh. So maybe it's that last paragraph where it kind of talks about what is a like literary criticism versus what is not. I think we wrote down for that one like a lot of different effects and stuff.
And we
yeah. I guess B is not stated directly. So we're saying, hey, that can't be an implicit assumption.
So it's like a toss-up in which had more evidence to prove it.
Yeah, I think we picked the one that kind of like matched up here, but didn't have enough evidence. Whereas A, we had that paragraph we can kind of refer to.
Mhm.
Ah.
And it was kind of like throughout. Now that I'm thinking about it, I feel like it was a little bit of in each.
Yeah, because if you know that some of the ways of evaluating it are better than others, then you can decide like, oh, am I going to look at the author's intention or not? Am I going to look at the ideal reader or not? Okay, that's a good
Okay.
lesson. See, I need to get some of them wrong so I get some practice too, right? So, but sorry about that. I hope it wasn't
No,
confusing.
you don't ever have to be sorry about that. It's the whole learning process together, especially for me.
Okay. It's crazy. Okay, so for which of the following conclusions does the passage offer the most support? Okay. So which one has the most evidence? All right, walk me through your reasoning for this one.
Okay, so when I think of conclusion, I think of like overall, like main idea, how was the passage closed out, but with the most support. And knowing what we discussed when we finished the last paragraph, it was just kind of like didn't really end well. So this is where it makes it a little tricky. So we'll see. Literature is merely potential until it is read. I feel like it's a maybe question mark. A literary work can be analyzed in terms of the forces that produced it. Yes, that was mentioned, but
Oh,
it's
this
more
is
like
the last. Yeah, this is the last
uh,
paragraph. I don't think they gave us an example to back it up. I don't remember it.
mhm.
It just felt like they threw a bunch of sentences, so we could probably cross out B, but let's look at the other answers and compare it.
Okay. The literary critic must assume an ideal reader. When I think of must, I think that's like a very like like only kind of thing. Like so, I don't think it's. Wait, let me look back at my map real quick. Wait, actually, yeah.
Yes, that's in paragraph 3. So what helps with these kind of questions is if you're not sure, you can write out on like the little, if you have like a little sheet of paper, your iPad, kind of like the pad that they give you, just write out where you know that that information is so you can double check it. So literature is merely potential until it's read was paragraph 2, kind of like in the middle.
Mm,
B, we already know that that one we're kind of iffy on, so we can double check those first. C was paragraph 3, and they mention it right here, but I just don't know if they give us much support for that.
yeah. I think our main point that we took out of it is that the ideal reader is using the structure as reference. So it wasn't really doesn't really align quickly. And then D, literary work may mirror the past or influence the future, which was the last paragraph as well.
So if you want to hit
Um,
two birds with one stone, you can double check B and D in the last paragraph and see if they have
Mm.
a lot of evidence.
so literature work can be analyzed in terms of the forces that produced it.
So that is B. Any other support
Mhm.
for that?
No, it just literally is just that. And then literary work may mirror the past or influence the future, which is basically just that statement itself too. Because then it jumps into like denying the critic, or they don't know any critics that would deny literary work.
So the
So
nice thing with writing down where it is, you can just be like, okay, if I have a limited amount of time, how am I going to budget it? It's like, all right, let me knock out 2 that don't have a lot of support. And so now we can check paragraph 3, and then we can go back up to paragraph 2 and see what's going on there. So let's try looking at paragraph 3, where they talk about the ideal reader.
1, 2, 3. Okay. So
Oh, I'm sorry. I miscounted the paragraphs. Okay, so this is paragraph. Answer is in paragraph 3. And assuming the ideal reader is actually, so yeah,
paragraph.
it's the following paragraph. It's in paragraph 4 and in paragraph 5.
Oh, I see. I see now. Now I think now that I'm actually like going through it with you now, like from like very like step by step in this, I'm noticing like how the highlighting is actually making it harder for me to now like find what I'm trying to look for through my map. So I think I have to really peel back on the highlighting.
I think what might help is instead of highlighting as you're reading it, highlight actually chunk as you're reading it, and then highlight at the end anything that you think is important. Because then you can separate what is important versus what's kind of like supporting details on the side.
Okay.
Okay, so literary works are merely potential until their reg is right here.
Mm-hmm.
And does it give us any support or explanation for that?
I kinda like because it talks about like all the different aspects of like their interests, if they're against or for the idea.
Yeah, so they explained it to us, explained.
Mhm.
And then the next paragraph, in the paragraph after, it says a literary critic must assume an ideal reader. I think this one has some support. Not here, but here.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure. They say they must assume it. It's a bit strong, but they do give us a good argument for why they should assume it, which is all this stuff right here.
And it's kind of like more explained in 2 paragraphs versus just 2 sentences. So it could be the better option.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure on this one because it feels very close.
Yeah, it's
I'm
the
trying to
must.
see.
It's the wording of the must that makes it like feel like it wouldn't be. But let's
Yeah,
see.
that's what's kind of throwing me off is like, oh, okay. So the lesson here. So what we're looking at is how we ended up picking between A and C is that C had more than A, right? Because this was like a sentence or two, and like you said, C was it was that whole parentheses right there. The must, it's good that you noticed it. It's a red flag. So you want to see, okay, does the author actually convey like how important this is? They gave us that paragraph, so I think that's why we ended up. Well, actually, how did you end up picking C over A?
I think I felt to go with C more than A is because I felt like it was only explained in 1 sentence. Like it only expanded on one more sentence after it was brought up in this 1 paragraph, and then versus this one, it was kind of like briefly talked about here, and then more points were added here about the overall idea. So I think being that it was mentioned more through 2 paragraphs, I would feel like that it was more of the conclusion versus one that was just explained but not like elaborated more throughout. I think I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah, it's like it just matches up with the question, the most support. So A has some support, C has more of it. And let's see what the A and C said. Because using that must in there is like very strong. So, okay.
Mm.
Yep, they said the alternatives are desperate. So they used everything from here.
Okay.
Yep, that was pretty good. I'm glad you went with your gut. The must was throwing me off too. So
Yeah,
the
that's
big lesson here, most support, they're literally talking about the quantity of support.
gotcha. So like when in doubt, like when you're talking about like anything to do with like concluding or the author's main focus, if it's got multiple points throughout the whole passage, then that would be the better answer choice, I guess. Or safer one maybe to choose.
Yeah, because the question's saying most support, and then like if this said like must or like maybe must not, that's when anytime there's like any extreme opinion, you want to like double check it. Like, okay, if they're saying it's must, do they give me plenty of reasons why? They gave us that whole paragraph, so that would check out. And the question's like, hey, which one is the most support? So A is like a sentence or two versus C, a whole paragraph. I think your reasoning was pretty good for this one.
Yeah. So in this case, it was if it was mentioned a lot, so it must be the better answer choice.
Yeah, It was mentioned a ton. It was elaborated on in that whole paragraph, so we're good to go.
Okay. Okay.
Author
The
of the
author
passage. Oh yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
the author of the passage probably rejects the use of the biography and psychology and literary criticism because these disciplines. Okay, so I think this is a specific thing because then it focuses on paragraph. Oh, shoot, I thought I did it too. I think paragraph 1, 2, 3.
Paragraph 2.
Oh yeah, paragraph.
So the specific thing they're looking at is why the author rejects looking at this stuff. And who does that relate to? Is it related to the author, the reader, the critic?
This one's relating to the thought process of the author.
So they're basically asking, why does the author of the passage not want us to look at the author of different types of works?
Because they're focused on the work itself.
Yeah. And yeah. And yeah, that's like exactly what we have in the summary, and it's that last sentence. So that should be, you're looking for an answer that matches up with the fact that, hey, they only want to focus on the work itself.
Okay, so cannot provide any any information about the literature. Okay, wait, I think I have. Am I thinking about this in the context of like why they're what opposite of author's thought process? Assume the author's
Oh,
intention.
hold on. Wait, hold on.
Is this kind of like a flip
So
question?
no, it's not. It's not a flip question. It's just what are they asking about is why does the author reject the use of biology and psychology when we're looking at literary criticism? So they're asking why. Your answer was, oh, we're only focusing on the work itself. So you're just trying to find an answer that matches up with that. All of these are reasons why they're
Oh,
asking, hey, what was the reason that the author of the passage, like the author of this like paragraph and stuff, doesn't want us to look at biology and psychology?
okay. So cannot provide any information about the literature. No, but the work itself does provide information. Assume that the author's intention as realized is the only intention that counts.
Is that relevant to that paragraph discussion?
No. Oh, yeah.
So these disciplines, it's referring to biology and psychology. So bio and psych can't provide any info about literature, not relevant. Bio and psych. Assume that the author's intentions as realized is the only intention that counts. That's in a later paragraph, so it's not the reason why. The reason why we know is that the work itself. So B is out.
Okay. Take into account the entire range of possible readings of literary work. Okay, so that one seems like a promising answer. And then focus on the process of literary composition and not on its product. Okay, so now I think it's comparing structure, but in this case, oh my gosh, I think I would go with C.
Okay, so takes into account, does this focus on the work itself?
Mm-hmm.
Are you sure?
Take into
Because
account the entire range of possible. Oh, it's like possible readings of different work. It's not talking about the actual work itself. So
yes,
I
yes.
said
Sorry,
no.
I can't. I realized I shouldn't raise my arms because I had the surgery there. But yes, I didn't have the surgery on the left side. So we know that it's focusing on the work itself, and we know that
Mhm.
the sentence it's talked about here, and the sentence that helps us figure that out is this one. Such studies, the ones that focus on what the author is thinking, their biology and their psychology, describe how they made the work, the composition, and not the structure of the thing composed. So, not the product. The product is the work. So, you knew the answer. It's just, you gotta be okay with being like, okay, is this the work itself? A,
Yeah.
not relevant. B, not relevant. C, okay, so it's talking about possible readings, but not the work itself.
Mm-hmm. The
D, they
confident.
just worded it. Yeah, they just worded it in a weird way. But you knew the answer from your summaries, so you didn't even have to like see the
Ah,
summaries work.
I know. I have to. Yeah, I think with more practice, I will get more confident and re as I rewatch more of my videos. I think one of them, I think I realized that I said like Jesus take the wheel like 3 times, I think, in one of
Yeah,
those.
I just could not stop laughing. And I was trying not to be like loud because I was like, okay, he's still reading and stuff. But I was also just like, if you see me covering my face, I'm either coughing or I'm just like actually just being like, oh my gosh. So for
He
this one,
eliminated the
or
sarcasm.
yeah, for like the last question, go back to the last question just really quick.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good. So the you said okay, the focus is like the work itself.
Hmm.
So how do you get that from answer choice D is that they're saying biology and psychology because they're saying these disciplines, right? So biology and psychology focus on the process of composition and not the product. So this is kind of like the opposite, right? We want to
Hmm.
focus on the work itself. So because biography and psychology don't let us do that, that's why the author is rejecting them.
Um,
So they just worded it a little bit differently, but the main thing is oh, the author rejected biology and psychology because it doesn't focus on the work itself. Um, and
it's
that's
the sentence after that explains it. Hello. Yes.
yeah. So I think you knew where to look for this for the most part, so just focus on that part. But you know, the summaries do a lot of the work.
Okay.
Okay, let's try another one.
The author of the passage would be most likely to agree with which of the following ideas expressed by other literary critics. Okay, so I think this is like a beyond the text type of question. But I think it's also possibly still focusing on the main idea overall because it's now saying based on these scenarios, which would the author agree with based on the main idea that I guess they were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So, literary criticism cannot be kept independent of the study of people involved in the artistic transaction.
So we need to kind of know where the author's opinion intersects with other literary critics. It's kind of tough. Okay.
Yeah. Actually, honestly, I feel like I don't know how to really approach this one.
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is anything in the summaries because we know what the author's focus is on for the what is it called? Literary criticism and looking at the work itself.
Mm-hmm.
So probably what I would do is just skim over the summaries and then look through the answers to see at least which of these matches up with what the author says. Because some of them I think we can maybe cross out if we know that they didn't talk about it.
Okay. So I think A, like how it says, cannot be kept independent of the study of people involved in the artistic transaction. I think it did talk about like also like how the ideal reader is. So I think that's like, yeah, I'll keep.
We'll keep it. It seems decent.
Mhm. Ignorance of historical styles and usage of the part of the critic can make the ludicrous interpretive errors. Oh, that seems like a
So do
big
they
stretch.
talk about history at all?
Oh, only right here, like history of taste.
But anywhere else in the main idea?
Not at all.
If it's not in your summaries, you can safely kind of cross it out.
Okay. When we decide to treat a piece of language as literature, we also decide not to focus on the author's intended communication. Oh, I think that's like opposite of what the idea is. Like they did focus on like motives of like an author, so it's opposite.
Yeah.
Literature can be defined as that which is taught in English departments.
What? I don't know
Yeah, I
how
don't
that's
know.
relevant. So notice that we were shaky, right? On what was
Yeah.
going on. We're like, okay, so main idea, author's argument. Here, let me draw like a Venn diagram. So it's like the main idea and where the critics. Okay, so if we don't know the critics, what we can focus on is what we do know, which is the main idea.
Yeah.
So number one, figure out which ones are close to the main idea. Number two, cross out irrelevant. I'll just say out of scope answers. And then from there, you'd have to just narrow it down based on, okay, which of these do they talk about more and all that kind of stuff. So D is out, which leaves us A. It's probably the best answer. If it's C, I'm gonna yell.
Oh,
So C, the only thing I can think of for C is you shouldn't look at like the author's motivation, but let's check what they said.
I think it's yeah. I might. I think I kind of have a feeling why it's not. Oh, why it's now correct. Sorry.
So declarations that good literature is more than effective rhetoric, and that the relevant part of the author's intention is what the author actually puts in the work, imply the passage author's agreement with the proposition that once a piece of language is classified as literature, its intentions are only of peripheral interest.
Okay, maybe I don't. That's totally not what I was thinking.
Me neither. Wait, imply that the author's agreement is that one piece of language is classified as literature. What did they say for the answer that we picked? A.
Hmm.
Oh, I think they
Because of
were saying that we have to focus on the work itself. So they never even looked at like the author's intention or the ideal reader. Can you go back up to see? I mean, once you're done reading it, like if you want to take a look at the explanation more.
No, I don't. I don't like this this question.
Me neither.
I feel like you would have to really like yeah, like I feel like this was a stretch.
Yeah. I hate to say it as a tutor because this is the AMC stuff, but like I don't like this one. Yeah. But I think what they were focusing on for A is, oh, you only focus on the work itself. And then C is more about like, yeah, I don't really agree with this one. But I think they went really big picture with this, more than I was thinking that they would. I always have a nagging feeling when I pick an answer and I'm just like, I feel like the AMC is gonna flip it on us somehow. But
It's okay. These messages are hard.
still, I want to give you something to take away from it. But the process
No,
we
this
did
is,
was okay.
all of this is a huge takeaway.
Okay, because it's still, I think it's still a good process of like, okay, this is what we know, so that's what we'll focus on, kind of going from there, and then figuring out, okay, like, can we narrow things down as much as possible?
Shoot, there's like two more questions. I know we hit the 11 clock mark. I want to just be mindful of your time.
Oh, that's okay. We can do at least one more. I feel like it's okay. So,
Okay.
okay, let me write scope again, just because it's good to practice. Go. An idea. Specific. Okay, yeah, you can go ahead and read it.
On the basis of the passage, one can most reasonably infer that formalist criticism has the capacity to distinguish. So I think this is I feel like it's a little bit of the main idea, but I think more like focus on the formalist criticism. So it could be a hybrid maybe.
Okay. So big picture, what the formalist critic focuses on and can distinguish between.
Work itself. So valid literary structures from invalid ones. So always a first choice. I'll just move on to the next one. One possible reading of a literary work from another. Okay, seems pretty decent. One author's personality from another's. No, I don't think that was they didn't focus on the author's perspective. Effective rhetorical styles from ineffective ones. It was mentioned, but that wasn't the focus.
So which one focuses on the work itself?
The this one.
Hold on. One possible reading from another. Remember the last question we looked at the reading? C versus D? So a reading of a literary work is how someone reads it and interprets it, but it's not the literary work itself.
That's right.
Remember, it says they focus on the work primarily.
So it's the valid.
We need to look at the structure because that's what the work itself is. A reading of a work is, think of it like as how someone interprets the work.
Okay.
But if I'm wrong, I'm gonna flip a table.
No.
Just like, please, just
We gotta love the
confirm and
Qpack
double check
one.
it. Yeah. Oh, okay. I can redeem myself as a tutor.
No.
Okay, so any questions on this one? Because we had another one, another question had a very similar thing where it was like, which of these is like the focus? Why does the author reject looking at biology and psychology of an author? And he said, oh, it's to focus on the work itself. But they had two answers like this. One was focusing on the reading of the work versus the structure. So always come back if you know, okay, it's the work itself, just come back to this part of the passage and you know that, oh, we have to focus on the structure of the thing being composed.
Gotcha.
Because studies that look at biology and psych of the author focus on how it's composed instead of the structure. So we should focus on the structure.
I think I accidentally initially read this as like the formalist critic is the one that was reading the work itself.
Yeah. So one possible reading, it's like how it's when they talked about it's being recreated in the minds of the reader.
Yeah.
Right? Because it varies enormously from like the person and what they think, etc. Okay, let's do the last one. We can definitely get that one.
Which of the following statements, if true, would most directly challenge, oh boy, here's the opposite types of questions. The principles of the formalist critic. Okay, so definitely specific on formalist critics again. And we know from that it's the work itself. So what would challenge that idea of the work itself? So the capacity to interpret a work of literature varies from reader to reader.
Oh, what you can do for this one is instead of saying so like challenge it, we're going for the one that goes against the principles. So just mark which answers go against it versus which one is the same as that. So opposite versus same. So which ones are like the opposite of the literary criticism versus which ones are the same?
Oh, and which is the one that we'll be checking off is the same.
Yeah, like the ones we want to cross off are the ones that are the same, but just like categorize them and then just go back to the question to double check, okay, which ones do I want to like keep versus, mark as an answer.
Okay. So the capacity to interpret a work of literature varies from reader to reader. So I feel like that does oppose the formalist critic view. Good literature is more than just effective rhetoric. So it was mentioned in the very end.
Yep. And does that match up with what they say about literary criticism and like the main idea? Like
it does. It's the same, so you can cross. Knowledge of the author's intentions is not usually reliable. It was mentioned that because it's based off of like all these different motives that they mention. So it's the same. The social and historical context of a work of literature cannot be ignored. Oh boy, this is where it's like a little vague. So here, I think it's back to here. Expression of various readings which the work has received also takes a critical way from the work into psychology and the historical taste. So if this is saying the social and historical context of work of literature cannot be ignored.
Does a formalist critic ignore it?
Yeah, because it's taking the critics away.
So I guess this would be opposite.
Yeah.
So which of these would most challenge what the formalist critic is doing? I guess which one is like a more important point? for the formless critic?
Maybe D because it's like literally mentioned right here.
Yeah, let's just check D. I
Okay.
think for A, capacity to interpret the work varies from reader to reader. That feeds into a point about them being concerned with the work itself. But
Mm,
yeah, let's try D because I'm kind of curious. Oh, okay. So let's see how they pick between A and B
Okay, so
because
A.
our reasoning. Okay, yeah, go for it.
So it says this response is quoted verbatim from the passage statement that the formalist critic knows as well as anyone that literary works are recreated in the minds of actual readers. Okay, so we did know that. Who vary enormously in the capabilities of their interests, their prejudice, and their ideas.
It
Okay.
doesn't tell you anything about if they opposed it or not. So
Yeah.
I guess they're just like, oh, it's a detail from the passage, not related to a formalist critic.
And then D is the passage states as a principle of the formalist criticism that the reduction of the work of literature to its causes does not constitute literary criticism. Therefore, the formalist critic does not indulge in speculation on the mental processes of the author. The assertion that the social and historical contexts of the work of literature cannot be ignored would directly challenge this principle, since it implies that attention to the social circumstances that form the author's mind provides information relevant to the critical analysis of the work of literature.
It's the same
Whoa.
thing as what you pulled from. Yeah, so you went, when we look back at the question, we're like, okay, scroll up to the question really quick. We're like, okay, which of these actually most challenges what the formalist critic is saying? So answer choice A is just, it's there. Answer choice D, you're like, well, it's verbatim. So there you go. That was
Yeah,
really
and
good.
it's
That
saying
was
that
very
it cannot
confident.
be. Yeah, I was like, I think it's just because the cannot. So I was like, oh yeah, it cannot be ignored. But obviously, it just stated that it doesn't matter. It could be ignored.
Yeah,
Okay.
so we're just looking opposite versus same, picking the answer that's the same. But that was pretty good. Yeah, any questions from today? Oh, do we still have more? Oh no.
Oh no, that was the last one.
Okay, okay. Okay, let me stop the recording.